It was October 10, 1793. Midnight had already passed, but the air inside the conciergerie prison in Paris remained thick, almost suffocating. Damp stone walls pressed inward like a tomb, and in a dim corner, a candle trembled in its own dying flame. That fragile light flickered across the face of a woman who had once worn diamonds worth a kingdom, now reduced to rags and silence. For months, she had been confined here, stripped of her title, her children, and her dignity. No longer addressed as Her Majesty, she was now simply the widow Capet. And yet, her final torment was not the guillotine. It was what she endured in the hours leading up to an ordeal so perverse, so humiliating, that even her enemies dared not speak of it in public. Sometimes she cried out in the middle of the night, that when asked about her execution, she simply smiled. "They cannot kill what's already dead," she had said to one jailer. He had never returned to her cell again, but they refused to give her privacy. 3 male guards stood watch, insisting that protocol required it. Some accounts suggest she protested, begged, even wept. Others say she stood silently and disrobed without a word. But that, too, came at a cost. The price of dignity, when surrounded by cruelty, is madness. And as the cart was prepared to take her to the scaffold, Marie Antoinette whispered something under her breath. A prayer, a curse. The guard who stood closest later said he heard a mutter. "My sins are not what you think they are." What is certain is that the scene was meant as one final humiliation ritual, stripping not just of her clothes, but of her identity. One witness claimed that she was forced to wear a tattered white chemise, once worn by plague victims. The symbolism was deliberate. The queen was to die as nothing more than a diseased traitor. Once she whispered, "Antoine, forgive me." No one knew who Antoine was. Some speculated it was a childhood servant. As she stood there, exposed and trembling, one of the guards dropped his gaze. Another bit his lip. For the briefest second, even her tormentors were reminded of her humanity. But the spell quickly broke. They bound her hands behind her back, roughly and without ceremony. Her hair, once her pride, had already been hacked off earlier that day. She was ready. Others believed it was a figment of her unraveling mind. But one guard claimed that on that final night, Marie screamed at nothing, crying that someone had taken a candle. The guards found her curled up in the corner, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. The candle hadn't moved. Marie Antoinette, once Queen of France, sat on a straw mat, her back bent, her cheeks hollow, her eyes fixed on the ground but seeing something far beyond the walls. She would be dead by morning. Outside, the streets of Paris buzzed with the frenzy of revolution, but within these walls, only the sound of dripping water and the echo of bootsteps remained. But tonight, you will hear it. Marie had once been the most hated woman in France, accused of greed, of indifference, of betrayal. But what most don't realize is that the revolutionaries didn't just want her dead. They wanted her ruined, humiliated, reduced to something less than human. Her prison cell had no privacy. Guards observed her every move, even as she slept or tried to. She was watched while eating, undressing, relieving herself, and not silently, no. Everything she did was recorded and marked. Her guards scribbled in notebooks, detailing her every habit, as if collecting the final moments of a rare animal before execution. Her cellmate, a prison spy planted by the revolution, wrote in her report that Marie had begun speaking to the walls. Perhaps more chilling were the rumors that circulated among the guards, that Marie had stopped sleeping altogether, that she no longer reacted to insults or orders. But what happened shortly before dawn was perhaps the most disturbing of all. On the orders of the tribunal, Marie was told to change into the dress she would wear to her execution. And yet, in that moment, something changed. Ready, but not broken. What no one expected was that her final hours would reveal a steel within her that not even the revolution could melt. But what sins had she meant? The night was not yet over, and the darkest revelations were still to come. There were rumors disturbing, hushed, and feverishly denied that within the temple prison, before she was transferred to the concierge, Marie Antoinette had been the target of something far darker than just surveillance. The revolutionary government had developed a sick fascination with not just punishing her body, but corrupting her legacy. But everything changed when her young son, Louis Charles, was ripped from her arms. He was placed in the custody of a drunken shoemaker Saman who had one task: to turn the Dauphin into a weapon against his own mother. The goal wasn't justice, it was annihilation. The method, infiltration. Within the temple walls, Marie was first imprisoned alongside her children and what followed remains one of the most sinister experiments in state-sponsored psychological manipulation. The accusation was clear. Marie Antoinette had committed incest. It was a lie so grotesque, so utterly manufactured, that even hardened enemies of the monarchy found themselves silent. But silence was complicity, and silence, in the revolution, was survival. The boy was isolated, starved, beaten, and threatened until he began to repeat what they told him, that his mother had abused him. "God may forgive me," she whispered, "but I have not forgiven myself." That she had touched him, that she was no longer a queen, but a monster, not with demons, as some of her more deranged accusers claimed, but with traitors within the court, that she had tried to arrange an escape, not just for herself, but for her son. Anonymous foul, often containing nothing but drawings of mutilated blood-streaked guillotines or grotesque caricatures of her face being devoured by rats. They were slipped under her door, left in her food tray, tucked inside the thin mattress where she tried to sleep. Some were written in children's handwriting, others in blood-red ink. She never responded, but the guards claimed to find torn-up pieces of them stuffed into her mouth one morning. Whether in defiance or madness, no one knew. That she had offered information state secrets in exchange for his release. But she was double-crossed. The boy was taken anyway, and she was left to rot. And they recorded it all. Always the same melody, soft, off-key, and endless. A song no one could identify, as if the air itself recoiled from her presence. Even the rats avoided her bed, and in her final hours she spoke less and less. But when she did, her words were increasingly cryptic. When asked, she would only say, "He liked it," before they made him forget. When the guards read the boy's forced confession aloud in court, even the revolutionaries shifted uncomfortably. His tongue had been torn out. Officially was deemed a suicide. A letter, unsigned, found tucked inside her shoe after her execution. In it, a single sentence was scrawled in shaky ink. Unofficially, the other guards whispered that he had begun hearing voices. Female voices, chanting, laughing. The trial had to continue. The execution had to proceed. Marie's reaction was not a scream. It was not tears. She simply stood up and said, "I appeal to all mothers," and sat back down. But Rosalie's journal tells another story. She noted that after a few days, Marie stopped eating, that she stared into corners for hours, that she would whisper in German, pacing the cell like an animal. At night, Rosalie claimed, Marie would press her ear against the wall and speak to someone no one else could hear, that it rang in their ears even when they were off. Some claimed it echoed through the stone halls when she wasn't even awake. It was dismissed as superstition until 2 guards abruptly resigned and fled the city, refusing to explain why. That single sentence shook the courtroom. For a brief, horrifying moment, everyone realized the revolution had crossed a line, but it was too late to turn back. But her torment wasn't only legal or public. Behind the scenes, the walls of the prison held their own secrets. One of the female guards assigned to her cell, a former seamstress named Rosselli, was said to be sympathetic at first. A priest, brought to offer her last confession, was stunned to find that Marie refused absolution. There are theories, some whispered in salons long after the revolution burned itself out, that Marie had made a secret pact. This betrayal, if true, would explain what came next. Inside the prison, letters began arriving. And then there was the singing. According to records from the prison staff, on several nights Marie began to hum a lullaby. The he was, of course, her son. The song continued, night after night, even as she wasted away. Guards started avoiding her cell. They said the song followed them. Others weren't as lucky. One particularly cruel guard, known only by his surname Lacroix, was found dead in the latrine weeks later. Marie Antoinette never asked about it. Her cell, they said, had become colder, damper. "She will wear my face," she told one nurse, "but not my fate." No one understood what she meant. Was she speaking in metaphors, referring to some unknown descendant, or had her mind finally broken? There was one last detail that never appeared in the official record. They broke the queen, but the ghost remains. What ghost? A memory? A legacy? Or something worse? The truth was buried the moment her head fell into the basket. But what if the horror didn't end there? What if something followed? And what if it still lingers in the very heart of Paris? October 16, 1793. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation and something foul, a hatred disguised as justice. Marie Antoinette stood before the revolutionary tribunal, not as a queen, not even as a woman, conspiring with Austria to overthrow the Republic, naturally. But then came the accusation that froze even the most hardened faces in the crowd, incest with her own son. But as a symbol of everything France was trying to purge: monarchy, privilege, opulence. But as the proceedings began, it became clear that they were not interested in facts. They wanted blood, and they wanted humiliation first. Instead, she stood up and spoke words that have haunted history since. The charges against her were a grotesque theater, high treason, of course. The whole fell silent. "I appeal to all mothers here." It had been hinted at for weeks in revolutionary pamphlets and whispering salons, but to hear it declared openly, in the full light of day, was a different thing entirely. They called the 8-year-old Louis Charles as a witness, though no one spoke of how broken the child had become. The courtroom wasn't supposed to feel this real, but the spectacle continued. Her clothes were replaced with a coarse, white chemise, not silk, not lace, just the fabric worn by the condemned. Her hair, already cut unevenly during captivity, was shorn once more, but this time brutally. Not for cleanliness, for symbolism. The public executioner himself did it, tugging at her scalp until strands came loose in bloodied clumps. Witness after witness, many of them coerced, denounced her. She asked for a ribbon to tie her hair neatly, as it might interfere with the blade. They laughed. She sat upright, her posture regal, eyes forward, lips pressed tightly together. Some priests, watching from afar, crossed themselves without realizing it. One man fainted when she looked directly at him. The crowd wanted a sobbing monster. Instead, they saw a corpse that hadn't yet fallen, a woman who had already died long before they could kill her. The executioner gripped her arm roughly, guiding her up the steps. But she tripped. Or did she? Her foot struck the executioner's boot, and she mumbled, "Pardon me, monsieur, I did not do it on purpose." The crowd grew quiet, anticipating, perhaps savoring, the climax of their revolution. Former servants, former friends, people who once bowed before her now spat at her name. One noblewoman, once a confidante of Versailles, testified that Marie had held secret midnight meetings with Austrian spies inside the palace chapel without a single shred of evidence. And they were merciless. Rotten vegetables, excrement, and insults rained upon her. "Whore of Austria," they screamed. Let her eat dev, not a twitch, a glance, as if watching him, as if knowing. No monument, no prayer, no cross. A woman reached out and struck her with a broomstick. Another spat in her face. His eyes were vacant, his body sickly and thin. He recited a prepared statement accusing his mother of unspeakable acts, his voice monotone, hollow, that the statues in the square nearest the conciergerie began to weep during rainstorms, that a faceless woman in white was seen pacing the roof of the prison weeks later, not by vandals, not by royalists, but from within. He claimed the soil had shifted upward, that claw marks faint but unmistakable lined the wooden lid of her coffin. He never returned to work again. Some said she whispered a word as they passed something lost in the noise. One prisoner later claimed to have lip-read the word forgive. Others said it was vengeance. And Marie, she did not scream, she did not weep. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict was death by guillotine, the sentence immediate. If I have not answered, it is because nature refuses to respond to such a charge made against a mother. There was a pause, a deep, cold, choking silence. Even the revolutionaries, who had orchestrated this performance, shifted in discomfort. The trial was a ritual execution masquerading as law. Her defenders, if they dared to speak, were silenced with jeers or threats. But before she could be executed, the revolution had one more ritual, a final desecration. She was stripped of her remaining jewelry, fragments of adornments, one's worth a kingdom. When her hair was gone, they bound her wrists tightly behind her back. Then came the cart. Unlike Louis XVI, who was taken to his death in a closed carriage, Marie Antoinette was made to ride on an open cart, exposed to the mobs lining the street. But something strange happened. She didn't flinch, she didn't beg. Some whispered that this unnatural calm was encouraged, it was possession, that Marie was no longer Marie, that something had taken her place in that cell. The cart turned a corner near the Rue Saint, the place where the palace walls once stood. Then came the scaffold. The guillotine stood tall, crimson with dried blood. Flies circled it lazily. Those would be her final words. They bound her to the plank, positioned her neck under the blade, and then the blade fell. But what happened after it was not silence. It was confusion. One guard vomited, another ran. The executioner swore that he saw her eyes move after death. Later, when her body was retrieved, it was dumped into a nameless grave at the Madeleine Cemetery. But someone returned that night. A gravedigger reported that her grave had been disturbed. Others claimed that a plague of rats suddenly overtook the nearby streets. Of course, these are stories, ghost tales, revolutionary hallucinations. But what is fact is this: they destroyed the queen, but in doing so, they unleashed something else, and that something still waits beneath the cobblestones of Paris, whispering lullabies to those who dare to listen. The streets of Paris soon moved on. The revolution devoured itself. Robespierre met his end, and the blood that once ran through the gutters of the Place de la dried into the cracks of history. But Marie Antoinette's story did not rest with her body, because, even after her head had fallen into the basket, her legend refused to die. There were whispers among gravediggers that her body had not decomposed like the others, that when exhumed years later for reburial, her remains were eerily intact as still closed, skin tied over her jaw, as if death had frozen her in defiance. The official report denied this, of course, but one clerk wrote in a private letter that the body resisted nature in ways I will not describe. And then came the tales of her missing heart. The reports were dismissed as unrelated, but in the margins of one document, an officer had scribbled a chilling note. Each mother says her child spoke of a lady in white. Each child said the same thing before vanishing. She sings to me. She wore no shoes. Her chemise was torn. Her head was tilted at an impossible angle, as if looking up toward a sky long gone, and she was humming, always the same song. And with it came the order to exhume and re-enter Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI at the Basilica of St. The official ceremony was grand, meant to signal closure. It is well known among some historians that Louis XVI's heart had been removed during his autopsy and preserved in alcohol. One even claimed the altar candles at the nearby church of Saint Marie Madeleine blew out every night at the same hour, 12:16, the exact time of her execution. What is less discussed, what is shrouded in secrecy, is The persistent rumor that someone attempted the same with Marie. That a surgeon, or perhaps a guard with access to the grave, cut open her chest the night after her burial. The heart was never found, but on his desk was a note that read only, "She never forgave us." Visitors to the concierge report sudden drops in temperature. Some claim to hear crying, others hear musiphone childlike lullabies with no source. One tourist in the 1980s fainted after standing in her former cell. Something born not of royalty, but of betrayal, sorrow, and unrelenting humiliation. Others insist her soul violated and unavenged, remained strapped between justice and vengeance. Perhaps the woman who once whispered, "I did not do it on purpose," wasn't he apologizing for a misstep? Perhaps he was warning us. When revived, she asked, "Where's the candle?" He took the candle. One theory claims it was stolen by a royalist cult, who believed her soul could be preserved in that organ at one day. It would be returned to a reborn France. Another version is far darker, that the heart was kept not for reverence, but for ritual. That in the secret circles of the new revolutionary elite, relics of the monarchy were used in occult ceremonies to bind the past and prevent its return. It sounds like madness, but is it? A record exists buried in the archives of the Paris police prefecture of a series of child disappearances in late 1793, all centered near the site of the Madeleine Cemetery. No suspect was ever arrested, no bodies were found. And then came the figure. Eyewitnesses, mostly workers, night patrols, or drunken wanderers, began describing a pale woman walking alone after midnight in the Rue Roy, where the guillotine once stood. The authorities denied the sightings, but the fear was real enough that local priests began blessing the street corners. In 1815, after the fall of Napoleon, the monarchy returned. But the priest who oversaw the final rites reportedly collapsed after the final prayer. He muttered, "The bones, remember." His journal was confiscated, but an assistant managed to copy a few lines before it vanished. One entry simply read, "She is not done. She was never done." Even centuries later, strange occurrences continued. She had never read the prison reports. Another man, a historian who spent months researching her trial records, was found dead in his apartment in 1993. Cause of death: heart failure. What does that mean? Some believe Marie Antoinette was the victim of political rage, nothing more. Because her execution wasn't just the death of a queen. It was the opening of something darker, something that had been brewing behind gilded curtains and marble walls. And Paris remembers every time the bells of Saint Denis ring on October 6th, every time a mother hears humming where no one stands, every time a shadow moves past the stone cell of the conciergerie, with no footsteps to follow. Marie Antoinette is gone, but some secrets, some curses, never lose their crown.